The gunshot cracked through the desert air 3 seconds before Zelda Harper felt the searing pain tear across her upper arm, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die on this god-forsaken stretch of road between Eureka and Austin, Nevada, in the summer of 1882. She'd been warned not to travel alone. Every person in Eureka had told her to wait for the morning stage, to find a traveling companion, to do anything except what she was doing right now, which was bleeding onto the dusty road while her horse bolted into the darkness with all her worldly possessions strapped to its saddle. But her father was dying in Austin, and the telegram had been clear that he might not make it through another night. So she'd saddled her mare at dusk and headed out. And now she was paying the price for her desperation. 3 men emerged from the rocks on either side of the narrow canyon pass, their faces covered with bandanas, their intentions written in the way they moved toward her with predatory confidence. Zelda clutched her bleeding arm and tried to reach for the small pistol in her saddlebag, but it was gone with the horse, leaving her with nothing but her determination and the knowledge that determination wouldn't stop bullets or bad men. "Well, well," the largest of the 3 said, his voice rough as gravel. "What do we have here? A little lady all alone in the dark." Zelda backed against the rock wall behind her, her mind racing through options that didn't exist. She was 22 years old, a schoolteacher from Philadelphia who'd come west only 8 months ago to help her father with his general store. She wasn't prepared for this. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this. The men moved closer, and she could smell the whiskey on them even from several feet away. The tall one reached for her, and she swung her fist at his face, connecting with his jaw hard enough to make her knuckles scream with pain. He laughed and grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she cried out. "Got some fight in you," he said. "That's going to make this more fun." Then a voice cut through the night, calm and cold as winter steel. "Not her, not tonight." The 3 men froze and turned toward the voice. Zelda looked up to see a figure on horseback silhouetted against the rising moon, and even though she couldn't see his face clearly, she could see the rifle in his hands, pointed directly at the man holding her wrist. "This ain't your business, friend," the tall man said, but his grip on Zelda loosened slightly. "I'm making it my business," the rider said, and now Zelda could hear the distinct drawl of Texas in his voice. "You're going to let the lady go, mount up, and ride out of here. You're going to do it in the next 10 seconds, or I'm going to put a hole in each of you big enough to see clear through to Sunday." "There's 3 of us and 1 of you," another man said, his hand moving toward his gun. The rifle cracked, and the man's hat flew off his head, the bullet missing his skull by what couldn't have been more than an inch. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, and in the sudden silence that followed, Zelda could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "There's 1 of me who can shoot," the rider said, "and 3 of you who can't count odds worth a damn. Now I'm down to 5 seconds, and I'm not nearly as generous as I was at 10. The men looked at each other, and Zelda saw the calculation in their eyes. The tall one released her wrist and stepped back, raising his hands slowly. "Easy now. We don't want no trouble." "Too late for that. Mount up and ride." The 3 men backed toward their horses, moving slowly, their eyes never leaving the rider. They climbed into their saddles and spurred their horses hard, disappearing into the darkness in a thunder of hoofbeats and dust. Zelda slumped against the rock wall, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. The rider dismounted and walked toward her, and now she could see him more clearly in the moonlight. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a face that was all sharp angles and hard planes. He couldn't have been much older than she was, maybe 25 or 26, but his eyes looked older, as if they'd seen things that aged a man from the inside out. "You're hurt," he said, nodding toward her arm. "It's not bad," Zelda said, though the blood soaking through her sleeve suggested otherwise. "They shot at me when I refused to stop. Can you ride? My horse ran off." He nodded, as if this was exactly what he'd expected to hear. "Then you'll ride with me. There's a ranch about 5 miles from here. We can get that arm looked at and figure out what to do next." "I need to get to Austin," Zelda said. "My father is dying." Something flickered across the man's face, too quick for her to identify. "Austin is another 15 miles past the ranch. You're not going to make it tonight, not bleeding like that and not with those men possibly waiting down the road. Best to get patched up and start fresh in the morning." Every instinct in Zelda's body told her to argue, to insist on continuing, but she could feel the weakness spreading through her limbs, and she knew he was right. She nodded, and he stepped closer, offering his hand. I'm Ryder Preston, he said. Zelda Harper. She took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Thank you for what you did back there. Don't mention it. He led her to his horse, a big bay gelding with intelligent eyes. I'm going to help you mount up. It might hurt your arm, so tell me if you need me to stop. He lifted her onto the horse with strong, sure hands, and she bit her lip against the pain that shot through her wounded arm. Then he swung up behind her, reaching around to take the reins, and Zelda found herself pressed against his chest, surrounded by the smell of leather and sage and something else she couldn't quite identify. Hold on, he said quietly, and she gripped the saddle horn as he urged the horse forward into the darkness. They rode in silence for a while, following a trail that Zelda could barely see, but that Ryder seemed to navigate with ease. The moon was higher now, casting everything in silver and shadow, and despite the pain in her arm and the fear still coursing through her veins, Zelda found herself acutely aware of the man behind her, the solid warmth of him, the way his arms bracketed her body as he controlled the horse. What were you doing out here? She asked finally, needing to break the silence. Heading home from Eureka, Ryder said. I had business there. Lucky for me. Luck didn't have much to do with it. I heard the first shot and came to investigate. Still lucky? Zelda insisted. If you'd been 5 minutes earlier or later. But I wasn't. His voice was firm, as if the matter was settled and didn't bear further discussion. They crested a small rise, and Zelda could see lights in the distance, warm and welcoming against the vast darkness of the Nevada desert. As they drew closer, she could make out the shape of buildings, a house and barn, and several smaller structures arranged around a central yard. This is your ranch? She asked. Mine and my brother's. We run cattle mostly, some horses. The house was larger than she'd expected, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Ryder guided the horse to the hitching post and dismounted, then reached up to help Zelda down. Her legs were shaky when her feet hit the ground, and she swayed slightly. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Come on, he said. Let's get you inside. The front door opened before they reached it, and a young man stepped out onto the porch. He looked enough like Ryder that Zelda knew immediately this was the brother, though he was shorter and stockier with a more open face. Ryder, what's going on? Who's this? Road agents shot her up on the canyon pass, Ryder said. We need to clean the wound and wrap it. Is there hot water on the stove? Yeah, I was just making coffee. Come on in. The brother held the door open, and Zelda found herself ushered into a large room that served as both kitchen and living space. It was surprisingly clean and well kept for a bachelor household, with sturdy furniture and a fire crackling in the stone fireplace. I'm Russell Preston, the brother said, pulling out a chair for Zelda. Sit yourself down and let's see what we're dealing with. Ryder was already moving around the room with efficient purpose, gathering supplies and setting a basin of water on the table. Zelda sat and tried to unbutton her sleeve, but her fingers were clumsy with shock and pain. Ryder knelt beside her chair and gently pushed her hands away. Let me, he said. She watched his face as he carefully unbuttoned her sleeve and rolled it up, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands that looked so work-hardened. The wound was a long graze across her upper arm, still bleeding, but not as badly as it had been. You're lucky, Ryder said. Another inch to the left, and it would have been a lot worse. Everyone keeps telling me how lucky I am tonight, Zelda said, and was surprised to hear the edge of hysteria in her own voice. I don't feel very lucky. Russell appeared with a bottle of whiskey and a clean cloth. This is going to sting, he warned. I know. Zelda gripped the edge of the chair and braced herself. Ryder cleaned the wound with careful efficiency, and Zelda bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out. The whiskey burned like fire, but underneath the pain was the sure knowledge that these men were helping her, that they were capable and competent and utterly without any of the menace that had radiated from the road agents. When the wound was clean, Ryder wrapped it with strips of clean cotton, his fingers deft and sure. You'll need to keep this clean and change the bandage daily. If it shows any sign of infection, you'll need to see a doctor. I will, thank you. Zelda took a shaky breath, feeling the adrenaline starting to drain from her system, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I should pay you for your help. No need, Russell said. We're not in the habit of charging people for basic human decency. Still, you've done so much, and I've imposed on your hospitality when I'm sure you weren't expecting company. A cup of coffee isn't much of an imposition, Ryder said. He poured 3 cups from the pot on the stove and set one in front of her. Now, why don't you tell us why you were traveling alone at night? That's not generally considered the smartest move in these parts. Zelda wrapped her hands around the warm cup and felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, refusing to break down in front of these strangers, no matter how kind they'd been. I received a telegram this afternoon. My father is very ill in Austin. The doctor doesn't think he'll last much longer. I had to go to him. Your father is Samuel Harper? Russell asked. Runs the general store in town? Zelda nodded. You know him? Everyone knows Sam Harper. He's a good man. I'm sorry to hear he's not well. He went to Austin 3 weeks ago to visit my aunt, his sister, Zelda explained. He took sick while he was there. The telegram said it was his heart. I should have gone with him, but I was teaching summer classes and I thought it would only be a few days. Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and she took a sip of coffee to steady herself. Ryder and Russell exchanged a look that Zelda couldn't quite interpret. Then Ryder said, I'll take you to Austin in the morning. It's too dangerous for you to travel alone, especially after what happened tonight. Those men might be waiting for another chance. I can't ask you to do that, Zelda protested. You have your ranch to run, and I've already taken up too much of your time. You're not asking. I'm offering. Ryder's voice had that same tone of finality it had held on the road, the tone that suggested argument would be futile. We'll leave at first light. That way you'll reach your father by late morning. Ryder's right, Russell said. It's not safe for you out there alone, and it's only going to take him a day there and back. I can handle things here for that long. Zelda looked between the two brothers and felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear and loneliness that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Thank you, she said quietly. Both of you. I don't know how I'll ever repay this kindness. Like I said, no repayment necessary, Russell said. Now, you look about ready to fall over. We've got a spare room upstairs. It's nothing fancy, but the bed's clean and comfortable. Why don't you get some rest? We'll wake you before dawn. Zelda wanted to protest, to insist she was fine, but the truth was she could barely keep her eyes open. The events of the evening had caught up with her all at once, and her body was demanding sleep. She nodded and let Russell lead her upstairs to a small room with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the dark expanse of the desert. When she was alone, Zelda sank onto the bed and finally let the tears come, silent sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her father, who might already be gone. She cried for the fear she'd felt on that dark road. She cried for the strange twist of fate that had brought Ryder Preston to her rescue at exactly the right moment. And when she was done crying, she lay back on the pillow and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the sound of voices downstairs and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. She sat up carefully, testing her wounded arm. It ached, but the pain was manageable, and when she checked the bandage, she found it clean and dry. The sky outside was just starting to lighten, the deep black of night giving way to the purple gray of pre-dawn. Zelda smoothed her hair as best she could and made her way downstairs, where she found Ryder and Russell at the table, eating breakfast. Good morning, Russell said cheerfully. There's food here if you're hungry. We figured you could use a hot meal before the ride. Zelda realized she was ravenous. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, and her stomach growled audibly. She sat and accepted a plate of bacon and eggs and fresh biscuits, and for several minutes the three of them ate in companionable silence. When they were finished, Ryder stood and gathered supplies, packing saddlebags with practiced efficiency. We'll take it easy on the ride, he said to Zelda. If your arm starts hurting too much, you tell me, and we'll rest. I'll be fine, Zelda said. I just want to get to my father as quickly as possible. They said goodbye to Russell and mounted up, Zelda sitting behind Ryder again. As they rode away from the ranch, the sun was just breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Under different circumstances, Zelda thought, she might have found it beautiful. The ride to Austin took several hours, and they stopped twice to rest the horse and check Zelda's bandage. Each time, Ryder was gentle and thorough, his hands competent and sure. Zelda found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing the way he squinted slightly against the sun, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he was concentrating. How long have you and your brother had the ranch? She asked during one of their rest stops. About 4 years now, Ryder said. We bought the land with money we saved working cattle drives up from Texas. It was pretty rough when we started, just a small cabin and not much else. We've built it up gradually. It's impressive what you've accomplished, he shrugged. It's hard work, but it's ours. That means something. Do you ever regret coming to Nevada? No. The answer came without hesitation. Texas was home, but it was also full of things I wanted to leave behind. This feels like a fresh start. Zelda wanted to ask what things he'd left behind, but something in his expression told her the subject was closed. They mounted up again and continued on, and by mid-morning they were riding into Austin, a small mining town nestled in the Toyabe Range. Zelda's aunt lived in a neat white house on the edge of town, and she came rushing out when she saw them approaching. She was a plump woman in her 50s with gray hair and worried eyes. "Zelda? Oh, thank God you're here. I was so worried when you didn't arrive last night." Zelda dismounted quickly, ignoring the protest from her wounded arm. "How is he? Is he still—" "He's alive, dear. He's weak, but he's holding on. He's been asking for you." Her aunt's eyes moved to Ryder, who had also dismounted and was standing a respectful distance away. "And who is this?" "This is Ryder Preston. He helped me when I ran into trouble on the road last night. He was kind enough to escort me here safely." Her aunt's eyes widened. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" "I'll explain later, Aunt Margaret. Right now, I need to see Father." Margaret nodded and led them inside. The house was cool and dim after the bright sunlight, and Zelda followed her aunt down a short hallway to a bedroom, where her father lay in a large bed, looking small and frail against the white pillows. "Papa," Zelda whispered, rushing to his side. Samuel Harper opened his eyes, and a weak smile crossed his face. "Zelda girl, you came." "Of course I came." She took his hand carefully, shocked by how thin and cold it felt. "How are you feeling?" "Better now that you're here." His voice was barely more than a whisper. "I was worried you wouldn't make it in time." "Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine." But even as she said the words, Zelda could see the truth in her father's gray complexion, in the labored rise and fall of his chest. The doctor had been right. Her father was dying. They talked quietly for a while, Samuel's words coming in short bursts between long pauses. He told her how proud he was of her, how much her mother would have loved to see the woman she'd become, how he wanted her to know that the store and the house and everything he had was hers now. Zelda held his hand and tried not to cry, tried to be strong for him, the way he'd always been strong for her. After a while, Samuel fell into a light sleep, and Margaret touched Zelda's shoulder gently. "Come have some tea, dear. You look exhausted." In the kitchen, Zelda found Ryder sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, looking slightly uncomfortable in the domestic setting. He stood when she entered. "How is he?" he asked quietly. "Dying." The word came out flat and emotionless, and Zelda realized she was past the point of tears, into that numb place where grief lives before it can be fully processed. "The doctor was right. I don't think he has much time." "I'm sorry," Ryder said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made Zelda's throat tighten. "You should go," she said. "You've done more than enough, and I'm sure your brother needs you back at the ranch." "I'm not leaving you here alone. I'm not alone. I have my aunt. You were shot and nearly killed last night. Those men are still out there, and you're going to have to make the trip back to Eureka eventually. I'm staying until you're ready to go home." Margaret looked between them with interest. "What happened last night, Zelda?" So Zelda told her, the whole story tumbling out in a rush, from the decision to travel alone to the ambush to Ryder's timely intervention. Margaret's face grew paler with each sentence, and by the time Zelda finished, her aunt was gripping the edge of the table. "You could have been killed," Margaret said faintly. "But I wasn't. Ryder saved me." Margaret turned to Ryder with an expression of profound gratitude. "Then you'll stay here as our guest for as long as Zelda needs to be in Austin. It's the least we can do." "I don't want to impose," Ryder said. "It's not an imposition. It's a necessity. Zelda will need someone to escort her back to Eureka when—" Margaret's voice trailed off, but they all knew what she meant. "When Samuel died. Please, Mr. Preston. It would ease my mind considerably to know she has protection." Ryder looked at Zelda, and she found herself nodding. "Please stay," she said. "I'd feel safer knowing you were here." "All right," he agreed. "But I'll earn my keep. If you've got work that needs doing around the place, I'm happy to help." And so Ryder Preston stayed in Austin, sleeping in the small guest room and spending his days helping Margaret with the heavy work around her property, repairing a sagging fence and fixing a loose board on the porch and chopping enough firewood to last through the coming winter. Zelda spent most of her time at her father's bedside, reading to him when he was awake and simply sitting with him when he slept. In the evenings, after Margaret had gone to bed, Zelda and Ryder would sit on the porch and talk quietly, their voices barely disturbing the desert silence. She learned that he was 24 years old, that he'd left Texas after his parents died in a fever outbreak, that he and Russell were the last of their family. He was surprisingly easy to talk to, a good listener who asked thoughtful questions and never seemed to judge. "What made you come west to teach?" he asked one night. "Desperation mostly," Zelda admitted. "My mother died when I was 16, and it was just my father and me. He was managing fine with the store, but he wanted me to have an education, so I went to Philadelphia to train as a teacher. I was supposed to stay there, find a position at a good school, maybe marry some proper gentleman and have a respectable life. But I hated it. The city felt like it was suffocating me, all those people and buildings and rules. When my father wrote and said he could use help with the store, I jumped at the chance to come home. Do you miss Philadelphia at all?" "Not even a little bit." Zelda smiled slightly. "I know I'm supposed to miss the culture and the society and all the things that are supposed to make civilized life worth living. But I don't. I like it here. I like the space and the quiet and the way you can see the stars at night. I like teaching children who actually want to learn instead of spoiled rich kids who are just marking time until they can inherit their parents' money. Sounds like you made the right choice then." "I think I did." She paused, then added quietly, "Though I wish I'd come back sooner. Maybe if I'd been there, I could have talked my father out of making this trip. Maybe he wouldn't be dying right now." "You can't think like that," Ryder said firmly. "You'll drive yourself crazy with the what-ifs and maybes. All you can do is be here for him now." "I know. It's just hard." "It's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't, it wouldn't mean anything." They sat in silence for a while, and Zelda found herself comforted by Ryder's presence in a way she hadn't expected. There was something solid and reassuring about him, a steadiness that made her feel like maybe everything would be all right, even though she knew it wouldn't be. Samuel Harper died 3 days after Zelda arrived in Austin. He passed quietly in his sleep, with Zelda holding one hand and Margaret holding the other. And when it was over, Zelda felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief that her father was gone, relief that his suffering had ended. The funeral was held 2 days later at the small church in Austin. It was surprisingly well attended, a testament to how well liked Samuel had been, even in a town where he'd only been visiting. Zelda stood dry-eyed through the service, accepting condolences from strangers who spoke warmly of her father's kindness and generosity. Ryder stood slightly behind her the whole time, a silent presence that gave her strength. After the funeral, Margaret pulled Zelda aside. "What will you do now, dear? Will you stay in Eureka?" "I have to," Zelda said. "There's the store to run, and my teaching contract doesn't end until next spring. After that, I don't know." "You could come here," Margaret offered. "Live with me. Austin is a nice town, and there's always need for teachers." "Thank you, Aunt Margaret. I'll think about it." But even as she said the words, Zelda knew she wouldn't take her aunt up on the offer. Eureka was home now, for better or worse, and she wasn't ready to leave it. The next morning, Zelda and Ryder prepared for the journey back to Eureka. Margaret packed them food for the trip, and made Ryder promise to keep Zelda safe. He gave his word, and they set out in the early morning light, the desert stretching endlessly before them. They rode in silence for the first hour, Zelda lost in her thoughts of her father and everything that had happened in the past week. It felt like a lifetime had passed since she'd ridden this road in the opposite direction, desperate and frightened in the darkness. Now she was returning with Ryder, feeling protected and oddly peaceful despite her grief. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything you've done, for saving me, for staying in Austin, for being here now. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." "You would have managed," Ryder said. "You're stronger than you think." "I don't feel very strong." Strength isn't about not being afraid or not feeling pain. It's about doing what needs to be done anyway. You've done that. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat some of Margaret's food. Zelda checked her bandage and was pleased to find the wound healing cleanly, with no sign of infection. Ryder had been right about her being lucky. What will you do when we get back to Eureka? Ryder asked. Open the store, I suppose. Try to figure out what my father would have wanted me to do with it. Maybe hire someone to help run it while I'm teaching. She paused, then asked, Will you go back to your ranch? That's the plan. Russell's probably ready to have some help again by now. How far is your ranch from town? About an hour's ride, close enough to get supplies easily, far enough to have some peace and quiet. Zelda nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach at the thought of Ryder leaving. She'd gotten used to his presence over the past few days, to the comfort of having him nearby. The thought of going back to her empty house and her empty store and her life without her father seemed suddenly overwhelming. You'll be all right, Ryder said, as if he could read her thoughts. It'll be hard at first, but you'll figure it out. You're that kind of person. How do you know what kind of person I am? We've only known each other a few days. Sometimes a few days is enough. He looked at her directly, and Zelda felt her breath catch at the intensity in his blue-gray eyes. You're brave and determined, and you don't give up even when things are hard. That's the kind of person who survives out here. They reached Eureka just before sunset, the town appearing like an oasis in the desert. Ryder rode straight to Zelda's house, a small, neat building next to her father's store on Main Street. He helped her dismount and carried her bag to the door. Will you be all right alone tonight? He asked. I'll be fine, Zelda managed a smile. I'm used to being alone. If you need anything at all, send word to the ranch. I can be here in an hour. Thank you, Ryder, for everything. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, and Zelda watched him ride away with an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her father's death and everything to do with the man disappearing into the gathering dusk. The house felt empty and cold despite the warmth of the summer evening. Zelda walked through the rooms, touching her father's things, feeling the weight of loss settle over her like a heavy blanket. She thought about the store, about all the decisions she'd have to make, about the life she was going to have to build without her father's guidance. But underneath the grief and the uncertainty was something else, something that felt almost like hope. She thought about Ryder's words, about being strong and brave and capable of survival. She thought about the way he'd looked at her on the road, the respect and admiration in his eyes. She thought about how it had felt to sit beside him on those quiet evenings in Austin, sharing stories and watching the stars come out. She was falling in love with him, she realized. Maybe she'd been falling since that first moment on the dark road, when he'd said those words that had saved her life, not her. Not tonight. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Zelda reopened the store with help from several townspeople who'd been friends of her father. She hired a young man named Thomas to help with the heavy work in the inventory, and she threw herself into the business with determination, learning the ins and outs of ordering and stocking and bookkeeping. She also resumed her teaching, spending her mornings in the small schoolhouse on the edge of town and her afternoons in the store. It was exhausting work, but she welcomed the exhaustion because it kept her from thinking too much, from dwelling on her father's absence, or on the cowboy who occupied far too many of her thoughts. Ryder came to town once a week for supplies, and he always stopped at her store. They'd talk about nothing much, the weather and the cattle and how business was going, but Zelda lived for those brief visits, for the way his face would soften when he saw her, for the careful way he'd ask how she was managing. One afternoon in late August, Ryder arrived at the store with Russell in tow. Both brothers looked worried, and Zelda felt her heart sink. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Those men who attacked you," Ryder said without preamble. "They've hit 2 more travelers on the canyon road in the past week. One man was badly beaten, and a couple lost everything they had. Has the sheriff done anything? He's got a posse looking, but that canyon has 100 hiding places. They could be anywhere." Ryder paused, then said, "I wanted to make sure you knew, so you could be careful. Don't travel alone, especially not at night." "I wasn't planning on going anywhere," Zelda assured him. "But thank you for the warning." "There's something else," Russell said. "We've been talking, and we think those men might know you saw their faces. They might come looking for you, to make sure you can't identify them if they're caught." A chill ran down Zelda's spine. "You think they'd come into town?" "I think they're desperate and dangerous, and desperate men do foolish things," Ryder said. "I want you to be extra careful. Keep your doors and windows locked, especially at night. And if you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you get to the sheriff immediately." "All right." Zelda tried to keep her voice steady, but she could hear the tremor in it. Ryder must have heard it too, because his expression softened. I don't mean to scare you. I just want you to be safe. I know, and I appreciate it." After the brothers left, Zelda found herself jumping at every sound, seeing threats in every shadow. She'd been managing so well, had convinced herself that the attack was behind her. But now the fear came rushing back with renewed force. That night, she lay awake in her bed, listening to the sounds of the desert wind and the distant bark of a dog, and wondering if every creak and groan of the house was someone trying to break in. She thought about Ryder, about how safe she'd felt with him nearby, and she wished desperately that he was close enough to call on. The next day, Thomas didn't show up for work at the store. Zelda waited an hour, then two, growing increasingly worried. Thomas was a reliable young man, never late and never absent without sending word. When he still hadn't appeared by noon, Zelda closed the store and walked to his boarding house. The landlady met her at the door, her face grim. "If you're looking for Thomas, he's gone." "Gone? Gone where?" "Took off in the middle of the night without paying his rent or saying a word to anyone. Left all his things behind." The landlady leaned closer and lowered her voice. "I heard he was seen talking to some rough-looking men yesterday evening. Men who matched the description of those road agents everyone's talking about." Zelda felt her blood run cold. "Are you saying Thomas was working with them?" "I'm not saying anything for certain, but it's mighty suspicious, don't you think? Him disappearing right after those men show up in town?" Zelda thanked the landlady and hurried to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a portly man in his 50s named Dan Cooper, listened to her story with a deepening frown. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Harper. I think those men have been getting information from someone in town. How else would they know which travelers to target and when? If Thomas was their informant and he's spooked and run off, that might mean they're planning something bigger." "Like what?" "I don't know. But I want you to be careful. Real careful. Is there somewhere else you could stay for a while? Friends or family outside of town?" "My aunt is in Austin, but I can't just leave. I have the store and my teaching." "The store and the teaching won't matter much if you're dead," Sheriff Cooper said bluntly. "These men are dangerous, and if they think you can identify them, you're a threat they'll want to eliminate." Zelda left the sheriff's office with her mind racing. She couldn't leave Eureka, but she also couldn't ignore the danger. She thought about Ryder's offer to help if she needed anything, and before she could talk herself out of it, she was at the telegraph office, sending a message to the Preston ranch. The reply came back within 2 hours. "Stay put. Coming now. RP." Ryder arrived in Eureka just before sunset, riding hard and looking worried. He found Zelda in the store, where she'd been trying to distract herself with inventory. "Tell me everything," he said without preamble. She did, the whole story tumbling out about Thomas and the landlady and her conversation with the sheriff. Ryder listened intently, his jaw getting tighter with each sentence. "You're not staying here alone tonight," he said when she finished. "Pack a bag. You're coming to the ranch." "I can't just abandon the store." "The hell you can't. Zelda, these men tried to kill you once. If Thomas was feeding them information, they know where you live and where you work. They know your routine. You're a sitting duck here. But my teaching, the children, will still be here when it's safe for you to come back. Right now, the priority is keeping you alive." He stepped closer, and Zelda could see the fear and determination warring in his eyes. "Please, come to the ranch. Let Russell and me keep you safe until the sheriff catches these men." Zelda wanted to argue, to insist she could take care of herself. But the truth was, she was terrified. The thought of spending another night alone, waiting for those men to come for her, made her feel sick. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll come." She packed quickly, throwing clothes and necessities into a bag, while Ryder waited downstairs. She left a note for the school board, explaining that she had to leave town for a family emergency and would return as soon as possible. Then she locked up the store and the house and climbed onto Ryder's horse, settling into what was becoming a familiar position pressed against his back. They rode through the twilight, not talking, both of them hyper-aware of every sound and shadow. It wasn't until they were well away from town, with open desert on all sides, that Zelda felt herself start to relax. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming so quickly. I told you to send word if you needed anything. I meant it. I seem to spend a lot of time needing to be rescued by you. I don't mind." His voice was soft, almost lost in the sound of the horse's hooves. "I'd do a lot worse than rescue you, Zelda Harper." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. just tightened her grip on his waist and let herself feel safe for the first time in days. They reached the ranch as full darkness fell, and Russell came out to meet them, his face concerned. "Everything all right?" "We'll explain inside," Ryder said. Over coffee and a late supper, they told Russell everything. He listened with the same intense focus as his brother, and when they were done, he said, "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. We've got plenty of room, and between the two of us, we can make sure you're safe." "I don't want to be a burden," Zelda protested. "You're not a burden. You're our friend, and friends help each other." Russell smiled at her warmly. "Besides, it'll be nice to have someone around who can cook better than Ryder." "Hey now," Ryder objected. "My cooking isn't that bad." "Your cooking could be used as a weapon," Russell said. "I'm pretty sure those biscuits you made last week qualified as rocks." Despite everything, Zelda found herself laughing, and the tension that had been coiled tight in her chest loosened slightly. These men were good people, she thought. The kind of people who made the West feel less wild and more like home. She stayed in the same small room she'd slept in that first night, and she lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house settling and the distant call of a coyote. She thought about the strange path that had brought her here, from that terrifying night on the road to this moment of unexpected safety. She thought about Ryder downstairs, about the way he'd dropped everything to come for her, about the fear she'd seen in his eyes when he'd told her she couldn't stay alone. He cared about her, maybe more than cared. The realization made her heart race and her palms sweat, and she pressed her face into the pillow and tried not to think about what that might mean. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Ryder and Russell went about their work on the ranch, and Zelda helped where she could, cooking meals and mending clothes, and doing the 100 small tasks that kept a household running. In the evenings, the three of them would sit on the porch and talk, and Zelda found herself laughing more than she had in months. But underneath the peaceful routine was the constant awareness of danger, the knowledge that somewhere out there, 3 men might be looking for her. Ryder rode into town every other day to check with the sheriff and see if there was any news. There never was. The road agents had disappeared, and no one knew where they'd gone or when they might strike again. A week after Zelda arrived at the ranch, she was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw 4 men riding into the yard, and her heart nearly stopped when she recognized the sheriff among them. Ryder and Russell appeared from the barn, and Zelda hurried outside to join them. "Sheriff Cooper," Ryder said. "What brings you out here?" "Good news and bad news," the sheriff said, dismounting. "The good news is we caught 2 of the 3 men who've been working that canyon road. They were holed up in an abandoned mine shaft about 10 miles south of here. Put up a fight, but we took them alive." "And the bad news?" Zelda asked, though she thought she already knew. "The 3rd man got away, the one the other 2 called Crane. He's the leader, the one who does most of the shooting, and according to his partners, he's mighty interested in finding a certain school teacher who can identify him." The sheriff looked at Zelda seriously. "He knows your name and where you live, Miss Harper. He's been asking around about you in some of the smaller towns. We've got men looking for him, but until we catch him, you're still in danger." Zelda felt Ryder's hand on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. "She'll stay here where we can protect her," he said firmly. "That's probably wise. I'll send word as soon as we have him in custody." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Sorry I don't have better news." After the sheriff and his men left, Zelda sank onto the porch steps, feeling suddenly exhausted. "This is never going to end," she said quietly. "That man is never going to stop looking for me." "He will when we catch him," Russell said. "And we will catch him. Men like that always make mistakes. In the meantime, you're safe here," Ryder added. He sat down beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I promise you that, Zelda. As long as you're here, nothing is going to happen to you." "You can't promise that. What if he comes here? What if he brings more men? I don't want you and Russell getting hurt because of me. We're not going to get hurt, and neither are you." Ryder's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "This ranch is defensible. We're both good shots, and we're not going to be caught by surprise. That man would be a fool to come here." But 3 days later, that was exactly what happened. Zelda was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the shot. It came from the direction of the barn, sharp and unmistakable, followed immediately by Ryder's shout. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. She found Ryder and Russell taking cover behind a water trough, both holding rifles. Ryder grabbed her arm when he saw her and pulled her down beside him. "Stay low," he ordered. "There's a man with a rifle up in those rocks to the north. He's got us pinned down pretty good." "Is it Crane?" "Don't know. Can't get a good look at him." Another shot rang out, kicking up dust a few feet from the trough. "But whoever he is, he's a decent shot." "What do we do?" Zelda asked. "Russell's going to circle around through the barn and try to get behind him. I'm going to keep him busy here. You're going to stay down and not move until this is over. Ryder, no arguments, Zelda, please." He looked at her, and she could see the fear for her in his eyes. "Just stay safe." Russell was already moving, crawling on his belly toward the barn door. Ryder started firing toward the rocks, controlled shots designed to keep the shooter's head down. The man fired back, and Zelda pressed herself against the trough, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and terror. The gunfight seemed to last forever, though it probably only went on for a few minutes. Then there was a different sound, a shout from behind the rocks, and suddenly Russell was standing up, his rifle trained on someone Zelda couldn't see. "Got him!" Russell called. "He's down!" Ryder was on his feet immediately, running toward the rocks with his rifle ready. Zelda followed more slowly, her legs unsteady. When she rounded the rocks, she saw Russell standing over a man lying on the ground, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder. The man's face was covered with a bandana, but when Ryder yanked it down, Zelda recognized him immediately. It was the tall man from the road, the one who had grabbed her wrist. "Crane." "You," she breathed. The man looked at her with hatred in his eyes. "Should have killed you when I had the chance," he spat. "But you didn't," Ryder said coldly. "And now you're going to hang for what you've done." They tied Crane up and threw him in the barn, then sent one of the ranch hands to fetch the sheriff. While they waited, Zelda sat on the porch and tried to stop shaking. Ryder sat beside her, and after a moment, he took her hand. "It's over," he said quietly. "You're safe now. He could have killed you, or Russell, because of me. But he didn't. We're all fine, and he's the one who's going to pay for his crimes." Ryder squeezed her hand gently. "You can go back to your life now, back to teaching and running the store." "Is that what you want? For me to go back?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ryder turned to look at her, and Zelda saw something fierce and tender in his eyes. "No," he said simply. "That's the last thing I want." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to stay, not because you're in danger or because you need protection. I want you to stay because I can't imagine this place without you anymore. I want you to stay because I wake up looking forward to seeing you at breakfast, and I spend all day thinking about talking to you in the evening. I want you to stay because somewhere in the past few weeks, I fell completely in love with you, and the thought of you leaving makes me feel like I can't breathe." Zelda stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. "You love me? Yes, I know it's fast and probably foolish, and you've been through hell, and don't need me complicating things. But I can't help it. I love you, Zelda Harper. I think I've loved you since that first night when you looked at me like I was a hero instead of just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "You were a hero," Zelda said. Her voice was shaking, but not with fear this time. "You saved my life, and then you stayed with me through the worst days of my life, and you made me feel safe and cared for and valued. How could I not love you back?" Ryder's eyes widened. "You love me?" "Yes, you stubborn cowboy. I love you." And then, because words didn't seem like enough, Zelda leaned forward and kissed him. His arms came around her immediately, pulling her close, and the kiss was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and fierce and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "What? Marry me, stay here with me and Russell, and help us build this ranch into something great. Teach the children in this area who don't have a school close enough to attend. Build a life with me. I know it's sudden and we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Zelda thought about her father's store in Eureka, about the life she'd been building there. Then she thought about the past few weeks at the ranch, about how right it had felt to be here, to work alongside Ryder and Russell, to fall asleep listening to the desert wind, and wake up to the smell of coffee and the sound of men's voices downstairs. She thought about how it felt to be in Ryder's arms, to see the love in his eyes when he looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ryder let out a whoop of joy and kissed her again, harder this time, and Zelda laughed against his mouth, feeling lighter than she had in months. Russell appeared in the doorway, grinning widely. "I take it congratulations are in order?" "She said yes," Ryder said, looking dazed and delighted. "About time you asked her. I was starting to think I was going to have to do it for you." Russell came down the steps and pulled Zelda into a bear hug. "Welcome to the family, Zelda." Sheriff Cooper arrived an hour later with 2 deputies, and they took Crane away in chains. The sheriff promised to keep them informed about the trial, and then he surprised Zelda by offering his congratulations on her engagement. "How did you know?" she asked, blushing. "Small towns, Miss Harper. News travels fast. I expect half of Eureka will know by morning." He tipped his hat. "You're getting a good man. The Preston brothers are about as solid as they come." After the sheriff left, Zelda, Ryder, and Russell celebrated with a bottle of whiskey Russell had been saving for a special occasion. They sat on the porch as the sun set, talking about the future, about the ranch, and the possibility of Zelda teaching children from the surrounding homesteads and all the plans they could make now that the threat hanging over them was gone. That night, Zelda lay in bed and thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. 2 months ago, she'd been a school teacher living alone, running her father's store, and trying to figure out her purpose. Now, she was engaged to a cowboy, planning a future on a ranch in the Nevada desert, and happier than she'd ever thought possible. She thought about that night on the dark road, about the terror she'd felt, and the certainty that she was going to die. She thought about Ryder's voice cutting through that terror, not her, not tonight. Those words had saved her life, but more than that, they'd changed it completely, setting her on a path she never could have imagined. Sometimes, she thought, the worst moments could lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes getting lost led to finding exactly where you belonged. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church in Eureka. Zelda wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and Ryder wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortable until Zelda saw him waiting at the altar, and his face broke into a smile that made her heart skip. The whole town turned out for the wedding, along with neighbors from the surrounding ranches and Aunt Margaret, who had traveled from Austin for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed Zelda with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by half the county. There was music and dancing and toasts that made Zelda laugh and cry in equal measure. Russell gave a speech about how happy he was to have a sister and how Ryder had been insufferable with lovesickness for weeks. Aunt Margaret told embarrassing stories about Zelda as a child, and through it all, Ryder kept Zelda close, his hand always finding hers, his eyes always seeking her out in the crowd. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Ryder pulled Zelda away from the crowd and walked with her to a small rise overlooking the ranch buildings. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Deliriously," Zelda said, "though I still can't quite believe this is my life now. Better get used to it, Mrs. Preston. You're stuck with me now. I can think of worse fates." She looked out over the ranch, at the house where she now lived, at the barn and corrals and the vast expanse of desert beyond. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been? If you'd been 5 minutes later that night on the road, or if you'd taken a different route?" "I try not to. The what-ifs will drive you crazy." Ryder tightened his arms around her. "All I know is that whatever path brought us to this moment, I'm grateful for it. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because they led me to you. You're getting philosophical in your old age, Cowboy. Marriage is making me soft." He kissed the top of her head. "Come on, we should get back before Russell eats all the cake." They walked back to the party hand in hand, and Zelda felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was her life now, her home, her family. The danger and fear and grief that had marked the past few months were behind her, and ahead lay nothing but possibility. The first year of marriage was an adjustment for both of them. Zelda had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and hard work, and the way time was measured in seasons rather than school terms. She set up a small schoolhouse in one of the ranch outbuildings and started teaching children from the surrounding homesteads, riding out to their homes to collect them each morning and bringing them back in the afternoon. Ryder and Russell expanded the ranch, buying more cattle and building additional corrals. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way that desk work never had been. Zelda loved seeing the results of their labor, loved watching the ranch grow and prosper under the brothers' careful management. She sold her father's store in Eureka to a young couple just starting out, and she used the money to buy a small herd of horses that she trained and sold to neighboring ranches. It turned out she had a gift for working with horses, a patience and intuition that even Ryder admitted was better than his. In the evenings, the three of them would sit on the porch as they had the first summer, talking about the day and making plans for the future. Russell teased them mercilessly about their obvious affection for each other. But Zelda could see that he was happy for them, that he loved seeing his brother settled and content. Zelda's first winter at the ranch was harsh, with heavy snows that isolated them for weeks at a time. But she found she didn't mind the isolation. There was something cozy about being snowed in with Ryder and Russell, about spending long evenings by the fire, reading or playing cards or just talking. And there was something deeply romantic about the nights she spent in Ryder's arms, warm and safe while the wind howled outside. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it a piece of news that changed everything. Zelda was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but had wanted to be certain before saying anything. When the doctor in Eureka confirmed it, she rode home in a daze, trying to figure out how to tell Ryder. In the end, she just blurted it out over dinner, and Ryder dropped his fork and stared at her with an expression of such pure joy that Zelda started crying. "A baby?" he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "A baby," Zelda confirmed through her tears. "Due in October." Russell let out a whoop and came around the table to hug them both. "I'm going to be an uncle." The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Zelda's initial worries. She continued teaching until she was too big to ride comfortably, and then she turned her little school over to a young woman from town who was glad for the work. She spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and setting up a nursery in the room next to theirs. Ryder was alternately thrilled and terrified. He fussed over Zelda constantly, worrying about her health and the baby's health and all the thousand things that could go wrong. Zelda found his concern endearing, even when it bordered on excessive. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him one evening when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I'm not made of glass." "I know, but you're carrying something precious, and I just want to make sure everything is all right." "Everything is all right. Better than all right. We're going to have a baby, Ryder. Our baby." She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly, and his eyes widened when he felt the baby kick. "I felt that," he said wonderingly. "He kicked me. Or she kicked you. Do you have a preference, boy or girl?" "Healthy," Zelda said firmly. "That's the only preference that matters." Their son was born on a cool October evening, arriving after a labor that was long and difficult, but ultimately successful. Zelda held him for the first time and looked into his tiny face and felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. "He's perfect," Ryder said, his voice choked with emotion. "You're both perfect." They named him Samuel, after Zelda's father, and he became the center of their world. Ryder was a devoted father, getting up for midnight feedings and walking the floor with Sam when he was fussy, and generally acting like no baby had ever been as fascinating or important as his son. Russell was equally smitten, spending hours entertaining his nephew, and already making plans for teaching him to ride and rope. "Going to make a rancher out of this boy," he declared. "He's barely a week old," Zelda protested, laughing. "Never too early to start planning." As Sam grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They hired 2 hands to help with the cattle, which freed up time for Ryder and Russell to pursue other ventures. They started breeding horses alongside the cattle, building on the foundation Zelda had established, and their stock quickly gained a reputation for quality throughout the territory. Zelda reopened her little school when Sam was old enough to play in the corner while she taught, and she found that she loved teaching even more now that she was doing it on her own terms, in her own space, for families she knew and cared about. When Sam was 3 years old, Zelda became pregnant again. This time, there was less anxiety and more excitement, the confidence that came from having successfully navigated parenthood once already. Their daughter was born in the spring, a tiny thing with her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's determination. They named her Rose, and she completed their family in a way Zelda hadn't known was missing. Sam adored his little sister, appointing himself her protector and playing endless games to make her laugh. Ryder was even more helpless in the face of his daughter than he'd been with his son, wrapped completely around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The years passed in a blur of work and family and love. Sam grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books as much as horses, while Rose was all spirit and fire, fearless in a way that gave Zelda heart palpitations. Russell eventually married a widow from town, a kind woman named Sarah, who fit seamlessly into their family and gave birth to twins who became Sam and Rose's closest playmates. Zelda watched her children grow and marveled at how full her life had become. She thought sometimes about the young woman she'd been, riding alone on that dark road, terrified and desperate. That woman had been so focused on reaching her dying father that she couldn't see past her immediate goal. She'd had no idea that the worst night of her life would lead to the best years. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder surprised Zelda with a trip to San Francisco, arranging for Russell and Sarah to watch the children for a week. It was the first time they'd been away from the ranch, away from their responsibilities since their wedding. They stayed in a fancy hotel and ate at restaurants and went to the theater, living like city people for a few days. But as wonderful as it was, Zelda found herself missing the ranch, missing the wide open spaces and the children and the life they'd built together. "Ready to go home?" Ryder asked on their last evening, as if he could read her mind. "More than ready," Zelda admitted. "As lovely as this has been, I keep thinking about Sam and Rose and wondering what they're doing. They're probably running Russell and Sarah ragged." Ryder pulled her close, and they stood at the hotel window looking out over the city lights. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like we've always been together. Any regrets?" "Not a single one. You? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You know, I think about that night on the canyon road sometimes, about how easily things could have gone differently. If I'd been a little slower, if those men had been a little faster, if any one of 100 things had changed. But they didn't," Zelda said firmly. "And we can't live in the what-ifs. We can only be grateful for what is. What is that I love you more now than I did 10 years ago, and I'll love you more 10 years from now than I do today. That's the thing about love, Zelda. It doesn't stay the same. It grows and changes and deepens, and every day I find new reasons to be thankful you're mine." Zelda felt tears prick at her eyes. Even after 10 years of marriage, Ryder could still make her cry with his words. "I love you too, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." They went home the next day, and Sam and Rose came running to meet them, full of stories about their week with Uncle Russell and Aunt Sarah. Zelda scooped Rose up, while Ryder lifted Sam, and they stood there in the ranch yard, surrounded by the life they had built, and Zelda felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This was home. This was family. This was everything she'd never known she wanted until Ryder rode out of the darkness and saved her life with 4 simple words. Not her. Not tonight. Those words had been a promise, she realized now. A promise that he would protect her, that he would stand between her and danger, that he would make her his responsibility and his privilege. And he'd kept that promise every day since, in 1,000 small ways and a few large ones. Years continued to pass in the steady rhythm of ranch life. Sam grew tall and serious, eventually taking over much of the ranch management and proving he had his father's head for business and his mother's way with horses. Rose became a teacher like her mother, opening a proper schoolhouse in Eureka and filling it with the children of miners and ranchers and townspeople. Russell and Sarah's twins became lawyers, moving to Carson City but coming home often to visit. The Preston Ranch became one of the most successful operations in central Nevada, known for quality cattle and horses, and for the integrity of the family that ran it. Zelda and Ryder grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies showing the wear of hard work and long years. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with time, tempered by shared experience and deepened by the life they had built together. On a warm summer evening when Zelda was 60 years old, she and Ryder sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had so many thousands of times before. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, Sam's 3 boys and Rose's daughter, their laughter carrying on the desert air. Happy? Ryder asked, taking her hand. It was the same question he had asked on their wedding day, and Zelda gave him the same answer. Deliriously. Good. He squeezed her hand gently. That's all I ever wanted, to make you happy. You've done more than that. You've given me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. A family, a home, a purpose. You've given me everything. We gave each other everything, Ryder corrected. That's how marriage works. Equal partners building something neither of them could have built alone. Zelda rested her head on his shoulder and watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose and purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and one of the grandchildren shrieked with laughter at something only they could see. This was peace, Zelda thought. This was contentment. This was the reward for all those hard years, for the grief and fear and struggle that had brought her to this place, this moment, this man. She thought about her father sometimes, wondered what he would think of the life she'd chosen. She liked to believe he would be proud, that he would approve of Ryder and love his grandchildren and great-grandchildren and see that his daughter had found her place in the world. What are you thinking about? Ryder asked softly. Everything, nothing, how lucky I am, how grateful. Me too. He kissed the top of her head. Every single day. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, Sam was lighting lamps, and Zelda could smell the coffee he was brewing. Rose would be arriving soon with her husband and daughter, coming for their weekly Sunday dinner. Russell and Sarah would be there too, the whole family gathering as they did every week, a tradition they'd maintained for decades. I suppose we should go in, Zelda said reluctantly. Help get things ready. In a minute, let's just sit here a little longer. So they sat, two old people who had loved each other for 40 years and expected to love each other for as many more as they were given. They sat and watched the night come on and listened to their family laughing inside, and they held hands like the young people they had once been, on a dark road where a cowboy had said 4 words that changed everything. Not her, not tonight, and not ever, as it turned out. Because Ryder Preston had made Zelda Harper his wife and his partner and his greatest love, and he had spent every day of their life together, proving that some promises are meant to be kept forever. As the last light faded from the sky and the desert settled into its evening song of wind and insects and distant animal calls, Zelda stood and pulled Ryder to his feet. Together, they walked into the house where their family waited, into the warmth and light and love they had created together, into the beautiful life that had grown from a single moment of courage and compassion on a lonely Nevada road so many years ago. The end had become a beginning. The worst night had led to the best life, and love, as it turned out, was worth every moment of fear and pain and struggle it took to find it. Zelda knew that now, with the wisdom of age and experience, and she gave thanks every day for the man who had saved her, and then spent a lifetime showing her what it meant to be truly, completely, joyfully loved. Their story became legend in central Nevada, passed down through generations of Preston children and grandchildren. The tale of how Ryder Preston had saved Zelda Harper from road agents and then married her and built an empire with her became the kind of romantic story people love to tell around fires and at family gatherings. But for Zelda and Ryder, it was never a story. It was simply their life, lived day by day, moment by moment, with all the mundane struggles and small victories that make up a real existence. They argued sometimes, as all married couples do. They faced hardships and disappointments. They grieved when they lost loved ones and worried about their children and struggled with the challenges of aging. But through it all, they had each other. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Ryder Preston died at the age of 78, passing peacefully in his sleep with Zelda beside him. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, and Zelda stood dry-eyed through it all, knowing that grief was the price of love, and that she would pay it gladly for the years they had shared. She lived another 5 years after that, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a family that had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined that night on the dark road. When she died at 83, she was buried beside Ryder on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read simply, Zelda Harper Preston. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, teacher. Not her, not tonight, not ever. And if love persists beyond death, if souls recognize each other in whatever comes after, then surely Zelda and Ryder found each other again, just as they had in life. Surely they rode together through endless golden sunsets, young again and free and endlessly, perfectly in love, the way they had been from the moment a cowboy's voice cut through the darkness and changed one woman's fate forever.